Hello, Honors Anatomy and Physiology. We're going to talk about the large intestine here today. I think this is going to be pretty short and sweet because your large intestine is pretty short. All right. The first thing on this slide, there's very few notes actually you guys are going to be writing down today, but you might be using some of these slides as references. But I found this diagram online, and I think it's a great overview of everything we've talked about so far in way more detail about what each part of our GI tract absorbs, okay? So if you start up here at the top with the esophagus, you'll notice that there's nothing, okay, that gets absorbed in the esophagus. Nothing is used in digestion. Esophagus is literally just a tube from your mouth to your stomach. Your stomach doesn't absorb very much stuff, but it does absorb water. It does absorb alcohol. We talked about that before, and you can see that there's a few other minerals, and minerals are basically non-organic things that we eat that our body needs. It's not important that you memorize those. The small intestine, which we know is made up of the duodenum, the jejunum, and the ileum. So this section right here, that's all representing the small intestine. And check it out. There is a long list here. There is a long list here. There's a long list here. There's a long list here, here, and here. Your small intestine is the big absorber of your digestive tract. So it's very long, even though it's small in diameter, it's very, very long because it does such a good job at absorbing. So there's tons of vitamins and minerals listed here that get absorbed. But notice the lipids, woo, excuse me. You notice that there are our four basic macromolecules: lipids, monosaccharides, amino acids, peptides. Okay, so proteins basically. They get absorbed. Okay, we've got all of those here as well. So the main point I want you, don't memorize this by any means, don't write it down, but just know that the small intestine absorbs a lot of stuff. We're talking the large intestine today, and check out its list. It's got water, some vitamins, some salts, sodium, chloride, potassium. Those are ions, so salts, which are usually absorbed along with water. And that's pretty much it. It does have short chain fatty acids, but that's not the main thing. It's mostly water absorption. So of all of the digestive enzymes and all of the water that we drink and consume, the small intestine gets all the good foodstuffs out of it. The large intestine just soaks up the water. Okay, think of it, that's its very simple digestive function. Okay. All right, so this is a picture that you guys have in your textbook, page 857. It's also a picture we've already labeled in your notes, so you don't have to really relabel anything, but we're going to talk about basically all of these structures down here, along with the anus, relating to your small intestine. So you have this picture in your notes, but I'm going to use this guy here. It's from your textbook, just a little bit more zoomed in of what is the large intestine itself. So the large intestine is short, but it is much wider in diameter. That's where its name comes from. And it has a very kind of square pattern to it, unlike the small intestine that twists and curves all over. It's pretty straightforward. And so the main sections of it, okay, this is essentially where your ileum, the end of the small intestine, empties into the large intestine, right? And at this point, once your foodstuffs are in here, it's feces. At this point, once it's reached here, we call this feces at this point. We've absorbed all of the nutrients that we want into our bloodstream. The main function, like I said, of the digestive tract here, the large intestine, is to absorb water. So Not any food being broken down. There's not even really many nutrients getting absorbed here. But as food enters in here, it first enters what we call the cecum, and it kind of, the food's going to travel this direction. It's kind of like this, I don't know, cul-de-sac, if you will, of the large intestine. Like, you know, this is the direction that most traffic goes. If you come back in here, right, you kind of have to do a U-turn to turn back around. That's sort of what the cecum is. And hopefully, okay, the movements, peristalsis of our small intestine will move substances up and out. But occasionally, this right here, feces, might block off right here because it is kind of a little cul-de-sac area. And the appendix, which is this tiny little tail feature right here, can get blocked. Normally, and there's bacteria all throughout here. There's bacteria in your small intestine too, but the bacteria, your gut bacteria, love the large intestine. They are also what is responsible for farts. We'll talk about that in a quick second. But the appendix here ends up having probably a lot of bacteria in it. Normally that's fine. But if your bowel movements are not moving through and something gets stuck, say in this cul-de-sac area, the cecum, and blocks this off, you can eventually get the bacteria building up in that appendix, and you end up with inflammation. The pain is very acute. It's right around kind of your belly button area where it's super painful. And it's an easy fix to have your appendix removed, but it's very dangerous and deadly if you don't get it removed. If it gets so inflamed, the bacteria is growing, you get lots of inflammation and blood flow to the area. That's what makes it painful. If that appendix were to rupture, this entire section here is filled with feces. And so you end up getting essentially like a spray of fecal matter that then is out in your, kind of free floating in your abdomen, and you risk infection of your whole peritoneum, that whole covering of all of your abdominal organs. And so the surgery to clean all that out, it's much more invasive. They kind of actually have to like pull all the organs out and like clean them and put them back in. Oftentimes you need a wound vac, something that's sort of pumping out any excess fecal matter that might be inside just your abdominal cavity. So moral of the story is, if you have sharp pain by your abdomen, go to the doctor right away. Okay, even if it's gas, okay, don't feel bad about it because you don't want to have appendicitis. Okay, all right. So in your textbook, there's a small section in your textbook that talks about appendicitis. In fact, if you want to read a little bit more about it, it is on page 894, right next to this picture in your textbook. All right, so continuing on our little journey here through the large intestine. The valve that separates the small intestine, the ileum, and the large intestine is called the Ileocecal Valve, and it'll control the rate at which the chyme, at this point it's going to be pretty much feces, is moving into the large intestine. The main things here in bold, all of these things in bold are mostly what you guys have labeled on your sheet. So the right here is the ascending colon, because feces is traveling up the ascending colon. It's ascending. It's going kind of against gravity in that first section there. But thanks to the very strong movements of peristalsis, it's able to force it up. Then it hits this corner here. It's not important. You know the name of it. And then it goes along across the top, okay, sort of a little underneath your stomach, okay, in the first part of your small intestine, the duodenum, but close to the top, sort of underneath your rib cage there, okay. It travels across the transverse and then down the descending colon, okay. So we've got our cecum is sort of the cul-de-sac here. We got the ascending colon, the transverse because it's going transversely, horizontally, then descending because now the feces is traveling down, okay, our descending colon. And then, if it helps you remember this at all, the sigmoid colon is sort of this S-shaped turn. I said turn. At this point, you got some turds in here. So we've got the S-shaped sigmoid colon, right here where you would have this sort of turn action. Okay, so that's right here is the sigmoid at the bottom of the descending. And then once it reaches this last little turn here, it hits the rectum. Okay? If feces is present in the rectum, you get a nerve stimulus to your brain that sort of tells you you need to eliminate. And you can read all about the defecation process. It's not important for your test, but I find it pretty interesting. It's in this section of your textbook. It talks about the defecation reflex. So once you hit the very bottom here, the anal canal, there is a sphincter. So a sphincter is just a smooth muscle that's circular. Okay, there's a series of different sphincters in here, but the external anal sphincter you have conscious control of. So when you have become potty trained and learned to hold and control your bowels, that is essentially your sphincter that you are clenching to keep things in that you want to keep in. Okay. So those are just the main structures of it. Now, do you notice that there is this little cord, okay, that runs the entire length of our large intestine? It's called the Tenure Coulee. Think of it like a little cord or a little tendon. I don't know if you've ever seen anything that, like, I don't know, you could pull on like a string and then like a fabric or something sort of bunches up. Think of like maybe a drawstring on like your hoodie, okay? That's sort of what this little cord does. This cord keeps some tension in your large intestine, and because of that, you end up creating in your large intestine these kind of interesting little bumps. These little bumps are called haustra. A single one is called a haustrum. So a haustra is just these little like blobs that you see. And if you ever noticed feces sort of shape or pattern, this might be a little recognizable. You might see some little divisions or bumps that have sort of been molded into that creation that you're making. All right. Let's see. The other important thing I already mentioned that there's bacteria in here, tons of bacteria, good bacteria, and they can digest the things that you can't. So things that we don't make enzymes for to break down, the gut bacteria break all that down for you. And it's important that you have healthy gut bacteria. You might see things that say probiotics on them. It's basically saying like good biology, good living things. It's bacteria that you're adding to your digestive system. And some of those probiotics might set up shop in your gut and do the workings of digesting things you can't. Some things that you can't break down are going to be like the plants, a lot of fibers, a lot of things that plants make. So most fibers, if you've ever had corn and noticed that the corn is shown back up in your excrement in the toilet, your body couldn't break down the corn, the cellulose that's in those cell walls of the plants. But your bacteria can. And so oftentimes those things that you can't digest, those things, once they do reach the large intestine, the bacteria get their chance to do their feeding on things. Now, there are some things that bacteria love a lot. And when the bacteria becomes really active, they produce an odor. And this is the odor that you are familiar with, flatulence, fancy word for farts. It's not you that make that smell. It is your gut flora. This is the word that we use to describe. I'm smiling because I find this fascinating. This is the word we use to describe your digestive tract companions. So the bacteria that live in the digestive tract are your flora, okay, your gut flora. And it's just this whole team of tons, millions of bacteria that live in there, and they help you digest things. If you see ads for fiber, okay, like eat this, it has fiber, it's good for you. You can't digest fiber and your body doesn't actually absorb fiber. But what it is good for is your gut bacteria, and they munch on it. And so what they end up doing is when they break it down in here, it makes things nice and slippery, so you have more pleasant bowel movements. So if you ever notice on those commercials, it might be usually an older gal, and she's like, ever since I was taking whatever with fiber, now I'm regular again. I'm talking about poop. It's not hard to poop anymore because they have fiber feeding their gut bacteria, making it all nice and slippery so that that feces just moves through that tract and you have a nice, pleasant bathroom experience for later on. So that's what those commercials are about. All right. Um, Now, feces, okay, when we get to what ends up out of your body at the very end, what is in there, okay? It's food you didn't absorb, okay? So undigested food, things that were maybe too large to be broken down. If you were ever a kid and swallowed a quarter or something, it ends up in the feces because your body can't, one, break it down, and two, it doesn't absorb it. Um, and then there's tons of bacteria in there, okay? The thing that gives feces its brown color is bile. And so that's sort of what's responsible for the coloration of it. And there's probably cells from the inside of your gut because we talked about your small intestine replenishes it constantly. There's lots of friction in there. And so you're probably excreting out a lot of your cells, but you shouldn't be excreting out things that your body wants and needs, okay? And water too. So if you've ever paid attention to, what's your poo telling you about your day or your digestive health? A more watery stool has more water in it. Feces has a lot of water in it. It also, if it's a firmer bowel movement, you might be experiencing maybe some dehydration. So drinking more fluids might help, okay, with that sort of backup and slow down of things. And anyways, so if somebody were to experience, say, diarrhea, they would be experiencing essentially what we call, the fancy word is peristaltic rush. Peristaltic rush is the fancy word for diarrhea. So think about it. Peristalsis is that squeezing, that rhythmic squeezing, okay? Let's say your stomach says, uh-oh, there's something bad in here, we need to eject quickly. Everything is going to move through the small intestine and then the large intestine fast. So it's peristaltic rush because that squeezing action is happening quickly to get everything out. And your large intestine's main job is to absorb water. So the reason why diarrhea is so watery is because it moved through here so quickly, so rapidly, it didn't have time to absorb that water. And so that's why diarrhea has that sort of watery, non-clumpy consistency. Is because it didn't spend enough time there in the large intestine. Fun things, I know. Let's see, I think that was it. Yes. So on your homework assignment for today, there's one last thing that I want you to read. It's very short, so please do read it because there's some questions. It's very, very short from your textbook, but it's about a bacteria that, and it's oftentimes coined and called C. diff, based on its scientific name for this bacteria, Clostridium difficile, as in difficult. So it's a Clostridium bacteria that is difficult to kill. And it causes some unpleasantness in your large intestine. But what I'm particularly interested in you guys reading about is how we treat it. And that is a treat for you to read about. I'm not going to talk about it here. Just read those 2 paragraphs. All right, you guys, have an awesome day. Stay tuned. We're getting really close to being done here. Your test isn't for a week. I'm going to be offering an extra credit opportunity relating to the digestive system for you guys. So stay tuned for that coming up tomorrow. All right, have a good one.